The billionaire's son had only 4 months left to live. What the maid did next left his father in tears. She was the only daughter of a billionaire, 6 years old, small, and always smiling. Then one day, after endless fevers and waves of exhaustion, the tests came back with a verdict so cold it shrank the room, a rare, aggressive cancer. The doctor spoke gently, but the weight of his words pressed down on every breath Emma had about 4 months left to live. Chemotherapy had failed. Immunotherapy had failed. Even experimental clinical trials could not shake the fire spreading silently inside her. Money could buy chances, but not time. And that was the truth her father, Robert Hayes, was forced to face after knocking on every prestigious door. From that day on, the hospital became their second home. Long corridors, the smell of antiseptic clinging to clothes, the steady beep of monitors counting out each fragile minute. Emma was brave in the way children often are. She didn't ask too many questions, didn't complain for long. She just wanted breakfast without the taste of medicine and a cartoon that ended happily. Robert sat by her bed, reading the same old storybook for the third time, laughing at the lines they both knew by heart, holding her small hand until she fell asleep. He tried to look calm, but behind his shoulders lived a fear. Carved years ago, his wife had died giving birth to Emma, and that memory haunted him, a reminder of a loss he could not bear to relive. At home, on a wooden shelf, stood a photograph of Emma's mother, serene, gazing into the camera, both hands cradling her swollen belly, as if holding the future itself. Sometimes Emma would look up at that photo and ask simple yet piercing questions: what food her mother liked, if she used to sing, if she told stories the way her father did. Robert answered with short, tender memories, carefully filtered so his grief wouldn't frighten a little heart. Emma nodded as if she already understood that some people can only be met through stories. She wasn't angry, she simply accepted it as part of her life. But acceptance is not surrender. Each time a new treatment began, hope flickered like a tiny flame in the night, and when the numbers refused to improve, the flame died, leaving only smoke. Private meetings with the medical team always ended with the same straight line. The tumor was spreading. The body wasn't responding 4 months at best, maybe less. Robert couldn't speak. He just looked through the glass window at his sleeping daughter, while his mind unraveled a list of moments they would never share. Her first day at school, her graduation, a wedding photo on the church steps. The list stretched on without end. Then, one morning, Emma asked for something different. Not why am I sick, not how much time do I have. She spoke slowly and clearly, her eyes bright in a way only a child's can be. Can I have a birthday party? A real one with balloons, a cake, a few simple games, so her classmates wouldn't get tired, a purple dress, and a tiny paper crown. Nothing more. Robert looked at her and realized her request wasn't naive. It was her choice of how to live. If time was running out, let it be memorable. He nodded and promised to give her the most beautiful birthday she had ever known. The mansion, once quiet, filled with footsteps and shifts of caretakers. Medication schedules hung on the fridge, gauze packs and syringes turned the kitchen into a makeshift clinic. But in the midst of all the routines and procedures, one person never left. Grace Miller had been there since the day Emma was born. At first, she was just the maid cooking, cleaning laundry, but in a home without a mother, her role quickly became something more. She fed Emma when she cried, at night soothed her fevers, brushed her hair in the mornings, and every evening read short stories until her little eyes closed. And one sunny day when Emma was about 4, she looked at Grace without hesitation and called her Mommy Number 2. No one had taught her that. Children simply know who stays when the night falls. From then on, the name stayed not by ritual, not by papers. Robert held on to his principle as an employer. Staff were staff. But principals sometimes bow to a simpler truth: who is there when the darkness comes. Grace Miller came to the Hayes home after the funeral, signed a simple contract, and took on the kind of tasks everyone thought of as background wiping tables, cooking meals, washing clothes, picking up toys that had rolled under the sofa. But a house without a mother needed more than cleaning. It needed a steady heartbeat, so the people inside wouldn't fear the night. From the kitchen and the laundry room, Grace naturally found her way into the nursery. She learned how to mix the formula just right, so Emma would drink how to hold her. So the cries would shorten how to time the lullaby, so it ended right as her eyelids closed. As Emma grew, the small tasks became rituals. In the mornings, Grace tied her shoelaces, checked if the toothbrush was wet to be sure she had brushed her teeth, dabbed lotion on the patches of skin made sensitive by medication. At lunch, she cooked soft meals mild and comforting. No one at the table offered big praise, so Emma wouldn't feel self-conscious, but empty plates answered clearly enough. In the afternoons, she sat beside her at the desk, guiding her hand to write her name more smoothly, sometimes adding a little star as a reward. At night, she dimmed the lights, told the shortest and happiest story she could find, and stayed until Emma drifted off. These things were small, but small things are what carry people through each day. Robert saw it all. He was grateful, though he seldom said it. And he also felt pain because the bond between Emma and Grace reflected the gap he himself could never fill. When he first hired her, he set down a firm rule: employees are not family. But rules can't govern everything. When a child wakes terrified in the night, she doesn't call for a job title on the payroll, she calls for the one who held her through her fevers. And every time that happened, the line between employee and family blurred a little more. Grace never asked for a title. She never demanded better pay. She simply stayed at the right time, in the right place, in the right way. That staying was not by chance. It had roots. When she was young, Grace's younger sister fell gravely ill. The family was poor, the hospital far the costs heavier than they could carry. The little girl died, and Grace carried with her a silent vow: if ever given the chance, she would not let another child slip from her hands. When she met Emma, a newborn already missing a mother, that vow found a place to be kept. The treatments began, then stretched on without easing. Protocol after protocol, transfusions that left Emma's skin bruised and darkened at the points of the needle. Each cycle raised a flicker of hope, then smothered it. Through all the rises and falls, Grace never left. She sat by the bed while the machines hummed, wiped tears when the needle-pierced skin warmed her small hands against the cold. When nightmares came, it was Grace she called for, not the nurses. After school, if she still had the strength to tell a story, Grace was always the first to hear it. On Emma's drawings, two women always appeared. One was the mother in the framed photo on the shelf. The other was Grace, standing beside her, holding her hand. Bit by bit, the mansion found its rhythm again. There were still medicine schedules, still machines, but dinner brought laughter. Sometimes Robert made a clumsy joke, and Emma laughed not at the punchline, but at his clumsiness itself. Of course, the illness did not vanish. And then came the day the medical team delivered the prognosis: 4 months left. The room collapsed into a silence heavy as stone. But silence does not last forever. Emma asked for one thing only: a real birthday party. The planning began purple as the theme color, a paper crown for her hair, and games gentle enough so she would not grow too tired. The hospital's recreation room was strung with balloons and purple ribbons. A long table draped in white linen held a cake frosted with soft cream, decorated with tiny sugar flowers Emma loved. Nurses added glittering stars to the walls. One quietly placed a paper crown on a tray, promising to crown the queen of the day. Children from Emma's class filed in, carrying cards, stuffed animals, and crayon drawings. Everyone spoke softly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile in the air. Emma sat in her wheelchair, a purple dress folded neatly over her knees. Her head was bald from treatment, but her eyes were as bright as ever. Each time someone leaned down to hug her, she burst into laughter, not noticing the smudge of frosting on her lips. Grace Miller stayed by her side, cutting the cake into small slices, feeding Emma, gently offering sips of water, adjusting her posture whenever she grew tired. Near the doorway, Robert Hayes stood back, greeting parents, thanking each guest, though his eyes never left his daughter. The music was soft, simple children's songs everyone knew. The games were gentle drawing pictures sticking on stickers blowing soap bubbles. A boy whispered in Emma's ear about his cat having 3 new kittens. She giggled, and Grace wiped frosting from her mouth with a tissue before pressing her finger to her lips in a playful shh. Nurses kept glancing at the monitors, then returning to paper plates and plastic forks. For those moments, the hospital room became an ordinary living room, filled only with talk of cake, candles, and colors. When most of the children had finished eating, the room slowed down. The music played faintly. The crinkle of wrapping paper faded. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor beside the wheelchair, offering Emma a spoonful of ice cream, her voice patient and calm. Emma tilted her head, rested her cheek against the chair for a moment, then turned and locked her gaze on Grace. She didn't blink. Her small dark eyes were steady, serious, waiting for a promise. "Am I going to live, Mommy?" The room snapped silent, as if a switch had been flipped. The music vanished. Conversations dropped to whispers, then stopped entirely. The paper crown shifting on its tray sounded loud as thunder. No one expects such a question at a birthday party, but it was Emma, the 6-year-old who had just laughed at frosting on her face, who asked it calm, as if she were asking for a crayon. Grace did not answer right away. Her lungs felt emptied of air. Her heart raced, but her hand stayed steady, keeping the spoon from falling. She reached out with her free hand and held Emma's tiny fingers resting on her lap. "You are very strong," she said, her voice husky but firm. "And Mommy is here. No, yes, no, no." Just a thread tied tightly enough to keep them both from being blown away. At the doorway, Robert pressed both hands to his face and turned aside. He had dreaded this moment since hearing the words 4 months. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he didn't know how to speak it to the child he loved more than life itself. But Emma hadn't asked him. She had asked the one she called Mommy, not Mommy number 2, this time just Mommy. Smooth, unnumbered, unquestioned. After that question, the party went on, but softer. The children played more quietly, the adults spoke lower. Emma still smiled when friends pushed her chair around the table, still posed for photos, still waved goodbye, but she never let go of Grace's hand. When the music stopped and the lights dimmed, the room returned to being a hospital ward, except now it carried the faint scent of cake instead of disinfectant. That night, Grace helped Emma out of her dress, brushed her teeth, smoothed the faint wisps of her eyebrows, and told a story about a princess who loved wearing a paper crown more than a golden one. Emma laughed and said the paper crown felt lighter. She hesitated, want to live. Grace nodded. "I know." She lay down beside her until her breathing steadied, then rose carefully to leave. Robert stood in the doorway. He said nothing. Grace said nothing. Both of them simply watched the little girl asleep, one hand clutching the paper crown like an unfinished answer. The house was quiet, but no longer cold. It was the quiet of things that had just become clear. From that moment on, everyone in that home knew the days ahead, however few or many, were no longer for pretending. They were meant to be lived, and if there was any way to stretch them longer, it had to be found. The room darkened. The nightlight cast its thin golden glow. Outside the window, the wind moved through the trees as if someone had just passed by, leaving behind a small reminder this night would be very long. Grace didn't sleep. She brewed coffee in the kitchen, the hum of the machine like a whisper, the bitter scent drifting into the hallway. She pulled out the old laptop she kept in a drawer, sat at the dining table, and began to type. Each search was a plea: new options, rare cancer treatment. When no response liver transplant for child living, donor liver transplant. No blood relation can donate. Every article was a whole. She read, scrolled down, climbed back up, and leapt into another. Near dawn, one phrase stopped her living donor liver transplant. Not the whole organ, just a part. The liver could regenerate. Conditions: the donor had to be compatible: blood type, tissue markers, enzymes. Technical words, but she grasped the essence: a match, ideally from family. Grace was not family, she knew that, but she didn't shut the laptop. A link led her to a clinic offering compatibility tests and transplant counseling. She filled out the form before sunrise, her hands shaking from fatigue and from fear of her own hope. The next morning, she excused herself for personal business and went alone. The clinic was white cold, the smell of antiseptic so much like home, she almost turned back. But she stayed, gave her arm for blood-signed page after page, confirming she understood what she was doing. The days waiting for results stretched unnaturally long. She still cooked meals, folded blankets, peeled purple stickers left on the living room wall after the party. She still sat by Emma's side telling stories when she was awake, marking down medication times like always. But in her pocket the phone buzzed, and each vibration was a skipped heartbeat. Then, one morning, the clinic texted, "Please return for your results." They handed her a white envelope. She sat, opened it, stared at the numbers and letters like a foreign script. The doctor came in, sat across from her, spoke, slowly, clearly, fully compatible. Grace didn't understand at first. The doctor smiled and said again, "It means you match." The blood type, the critical markers all aligned. This is rare, especially between two people unrelated by blood. But it is real. The room tilted. She braced a hand against the table, relief crashing into dread she could give, but would they let her? She thanked him, asked for a copy of the results, and went straight to the hospital. Meeting Emma's medical team, she laid it out. She was willing to donate. She had been tested. She was a full match. She wanted nothing but a chance for Emma. The answer came faster than an elevator ride down. Know the reasons: policy, law, protocol. "We understand your heart," one doctor said. "Kindly, but without legal or blood relation we cannot proceed. The risks to the hospital, to our licenses, to everyone involved are too high." Grace sat still, staring at her hands to be sure they hadn't vanished. Then she stood bowed and left the room without a word, because if she spoke she would cry. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, inhaled deeply, and texted Robert, "I need to talk." He came, listened as she explained everything from the tests to the rejection. Fear filled his eyes. "Don't," he said hoarsely. "Please don't mention it again. I already lost my wife. I cannot lose you. Emma needs you. I need you too." She understood. She knew his feelings weren't simple to name: gratitude. Fear, the desperate grip of someone who had already lost too much, holding tightly to what remained. But Emma needed a chance, and that chance lived inside her. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Grace sat again at the kitchen table and opened the laptop. This time she didn't search within the city or even the country. She typed new words: living donor liver transplant. No legal relation accepted, pediatric urgent case abroad, hospital policy, emotional bond. She read stories from other families, some tragic, some hopeful. She traced a hospital overseas, one that took on difficult cases, reviewing them individually instead of shutting the door at once. The online form asked more than an interview: patient's condition, prior treatments, test results, reason for donation, affirmation of risks. Grace filled it all out, attached the full match report, and sat staring at the blinking cursor on the send button. She thought of Emma and her paper crown of the question, "Am I going to live, Mommy?" Then she pressed send. She didn't expect a reply so soon, but the next morning an email appeared from Dr. David Salem. The first line was short. "I have read the file. Can we talk today?" Grace closed the laptop, laid her hand on the lid as if to steady the pulse rising within her. Outside, the noon sun pressed against the window. In the bedroom, Emma stirred, clutching her stuffed bear. One door had closed, but another seemed to open silent and steady, like the way a mother chooses to stay. The reply came faster than anyone could have imagined. The subject line was short, from Dr. David Salem. In the email, he wrote that he had reviewed the file, studied the full match results, and wanted to speak the same day if possible. Grace propped her phone against a stack of books on the table, opened a video call in the softly lit bedroom, and pulled the curtains so Emma wouldn't see. The doctor's face appeared calm, more silence than words. He listened from beginning to end, never interrupting, never rushing to promise. When Grace explained that she had been rejected because she had no legal or blood relation, he was quiet for a long while before saying something that made the whole room tilt. "I once lost my daughter to liver disease." We waited, and it was too late. From that day, he vowed never to let another child be left only with waiting. "If you are healthy, understand the risks, and are truly ready, we will consider this case with absolute caution. But we will not close the door because of one line of regulation." He asked for more detailed records, additional tests to confirm the donor's safety. Everything had to remain discreet, a false name, a private wing, as few people informed as possible to avoid legal complications. Grace nodded. She didn't need cameras, articles, or praise. She only needed a real chance for Emma. Before ending the call, Dr. Salem said, "We will do everything the right way, and quickly." At that moment, Robert received an unavoidable notice of an international trip 5 days away. He tried to postpone, but the partner could only meet then. Before leaving for the airport, he kissed his daughter's forehead, told Grace, "Call me any time," and departed with the suitcase lighter than ever. As soon as the space opened, Grace's plan shifted into action. She packed 2 small bags, one for Emma, soft clothes, her teddy bear, a few thin storybooks. One for herself, papers, test results, a wool scarf. A trusted nurse agreed to help arranging discreet medical transport and preparing documents under the hospital's guidance abroad. To everyone else in the house, Grace said simply, "Private checkup for Emma. I'll go with her." No one questioned it. Grace had always been the one to take Emma wherever she needed to go. The flight was long, the steady engine hum like a song with no refrain. Emma leaned against Grace's shoulder, strong in the way children hardened by hospitals often are. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she whispered. Grace smiled, "To a place where people will help." Emma nodded, hugged her teddy tighter, and slipped into sleep. Grace stayed awake, watching the pulse monitor flicker on her arm, whispering a silent prayer. Late at night they arrived. The private wing of the hospital was unusually quiet, no reporters, no visitors, only staff moving quickly in soft-soled shoes. They used the false names as agreed. Pre-op tests were repeated immediately. Blood type, liver enzymes, all the numbers she had read dozens of times confirmed again. Dr. Salem appeared briefly, just a nod, a steady look. "Tomorrow morning, 2 adjacent operating rooms. The team is ready." That night, Grace sat by Emma's bed, threading her fingers gently through the fine baby hair, just beginning to grow back, telling the shortest, happiest stories she could think of. Emma asked, "When I open my eyes, will you be here?" Grace smiled, "I'll be here." When Emma slept, Grace pulled an envelope from her bag and scribbled a few plain words, the handwriting uneven but clear. "If I don't wake up, know that Mommy said yes." She tucked it under the pillow. Not to frighten, but to make sure if the worst happened, Emma would never mistake this as anything other than her choice. At dawn, the corridor glowed as bright as day. 2 gurneys rolled side by side just a few steps apart. Overhead, white ceiling tiles, antiseptic so clean it seemed scentless. A nurse marked Grace's abdomen with ink. Another nurse placed a tiny IV line into Emma's hand. Dr. Salem stood between the 2 doors looking from one to the other and nodded. The doors closed without a sound. The clock began to keep a different kind of time. Somewhere else in the world, Robert's phone was about to ring. But here, there was only the sound of machines and the hands at work. No one spoke of miracles. They spoke of vessels, sutures, the maximum minutes a donated liver lobe could survive outside the body before finding its new home. In a small corner of the surgical waiting room sat 2 cloth bags, one purple, one beige. On the zipper of the purple bag, a paper crown dangled softly. The surgery began before the city awoke. The scalpel touched skin like the first stroke of a pen on a blank page. Behind it stretched a symphony of commands, machine rhythms, and steady glances exchanged by a team that had rehearsed more than 10 times. A healthy portion of Grace's liver was removed exact size, exact timing, exact preservation temperature, and rushed by steady hands into the room next door where Emma lay waiting. Each set of doors opened and closed like the beat of a metronome. Every opening releasing a brief exhale, then silence again. On the other side of the world, Robert was finishing a meeting when his phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. He nearly ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Hayes, we're calling from the International Children's Liver Center. Your daughter is in surgery. The chair behind him crashed as he leapt to his feet. What surgery? Where he demanded, his voice breaking. The nurse read the hospital's name, then Grace's. In a heartbeat, the pieces fell into place. Grace had once said she wanted to donate. The domestic hospital had refused. 4 months were slipping away day by day. He left everything, booked the earliest flight, and sent only one line to Grace that he knew she would not see yet. Please be safe. 13 hours. That was the final number remembered for the surgery's length, though inside it no one counted. Dr. Salem peeled off his gloves, whispered to an assistant, and nodded slowly. In recovery, Emma's body pulsed with a new rhythm, the transplanted liver grafted in her color, no longer pale. In the adjoining room, Grace was kept in deep sedation, her body given time to heal. 2 beds, just meters apart, 2 ends of the same bridge newly built. Robert arrived after dark. He rushed to the desk, gave his name papers and signatures, his eyes betraying the panic of a man yanked from a nightmare too late. A nurse guided him into recovery. The door opened. 2 beds, 2 bodies, breathing with machines. Emma lay to the left, her small hand-bandaged eyelids twitching in a dream. Grace to the right, pale, still, but there. Robert stood between them, uncertain whose hand to hold first. Finally, he held both his daughter's hand and the hand of the woman who had given part of her body to save her. A nurse quietly placed an envelope into his palm. We found this under Emma's pillow. Robert opened it, and the simple line crashed into him like an ocean. If I don't wake up, know that Mommy said yes. He could read no more. Tears came heavier than ever before, silent and unstoppable. The doctor entered, speaking clearly and simply. The transplant was successful. Emma's body was accepting the new liver. The first numbers looked better than expected. Grace would remain under sedation a while longer to ease the strain. The next days are critical, Dr. Salem said, but the hardest part is behind us. Robert nodded, speechless. He dragged a chair between the beds, his left hand clasping his daughter's, his right holding Grace's, binding the 2 heartbeats through himself. That night, he never left the room. When nurses changed IV bags, he stepped aside. When a monitor beeped long but harmless, he turned panicked eyes to the doctor, who calmed him with a nod. Between the two beds, he began to whisper the smallest things: the rain back home, the neighbor's cat climbing the roof again, the tree in the yard sprouting buds. He told Emma, though she slept, that her next birthday cake would have 2 tiers. He told Grace, though she could not hear, that the letter she had left would stay in their house, where all could see it, a reminder that would never grow old. The next morning, the first good news came earlier than expected. Emma's liver enzymes dropped. Her skin regained its color. A nurse whispered to Robert that they had seen children turn back at this bend before, and that hope always knows when to knock. Robert smiled for the first time in weeks, tired, fragile, like a small crack of sunlight across the sky, but it was there real. By afternoon, as light slanted through the window, Robert dozed for a few minutes. He awoke to the faintest movement in his right hand. Grace's finger curled. No one could say if it was reflex or miracle, but for him it was enough. He bowed his head, whispering thanks, unsure whether to God the doctors, the hands that had worked for 13 hours, or the woman lying silent beside him. In that small room, titles no longer mattered. There was no billionaire, no maid, only a father, a child, and a mother by choice. And between the 3 of them, the air lightened, as if someone had opened a window to let in new wind. The road ahead was long, but this time, it no longer led straight to an ending. It turned toward another path where every beep of the monitor was a step closer to home, to laughter, to a paper crown placed not as a fragile stand-in, but as a keepsake to last. On the 3rd morning, after the surgery, before the light had fully climbed the wall, Emma's eyes fluttered open. Before Robert could press the call button for a nurse, she whispered in a hoarse but steady voice, "Daddy, I want cake." Robert laughed and cried at once, calling for doctors and nurses. They rushed in, checked her numbers, and nodded softly. Her skin had turned pink again. Her liver enzymes had dropped into the range everyone knew by heart. Emma looked around, blinking as though searching for something familiar. "Where's Mommy number 2? The question came right after the request for cake, as if she had just remembered the most important part of her world. Robert squeezed her hand. "She's resting, sweetheart. She's very tired, but she's here." Emma nodded, reassured as always by those words, "She's here." A nurse gently placed a paper crown on her fine baby hair and said, "The Queen of Recovery needs her crown." Emma smiled a small smile, but it warmed the whole room. That afternoon, Robert went to the room next door. Grace lay still, pale IV lines running steady. He sat down, no speeches, just slow, quiet words spoken toward the woman asleep. Emma laughed. "She asked for you. Her numbers are good. The doctors say hope is no longer just an empty word." From his pocket, he pulled the letter, "If I don't wake up, know that Mommy said yes," and slipped it back into the envelope as carefully as one would place a sacred relic. "This letter will hang in our house," he whispered, "so everyone who passes through will know why our lights are still on." News of the transplant spread faster than anyone expected. First, a whisper in hospital corridors, then an anonymous post, then an article. "Caretaker donates liver to save. Unrelated child." The headline raced across social media. Calls poured in for interviews. Bouquets were offered. An organization wanted to award her. But Grace was still unconscious and Emma had only just awakened. The recovery room doors stayed closed. The "Do Not Disturb" sign hung patiently. On the 5th day, what everyone hoped for finally came. At first, just a longer blink. Then Grace opened her eyes to the ceiling, pulled in a deep breath. Nurses called the doctor. Emma was allowed a short visit, wearing her paper crown from the playroom, standing at the edge of the bed, both hands gripping the rail. "Mommy number 2. You're alive. Her voice trembled at first, then grew round and clear, each word finding its place. Grace's lips moved, tears spilling before a sound could form. A nurse reminded Emma to keep her voice low to avoid excitement, but every adult in the room was swallowing hard. By evening, Dr. Salem brought in new results. He spoke plainly, without embellishment. The tumor was shrinking. The new liver was allowing the medicine to work as it should. The road ahead is long, he said, but we are on the right path. Robert thanked him, words failing. He only bowed his head, then turned to hold the hands of both women in the beds that had become so familiar with the sound of machines. Outside the hospital, the story grew into a wave. Some called Grace a hero. Others asked why the domestic hospital had refused from the start. Some cited regulations and licenses. Others spoke of hearts and the true purpose of medicine. A medical board, so people said, began reviewing policies on living donation when there was no legal relation but a clear emotional bond. In one place, a medical director was suspended pending investigation. In another, a hospital added a new line to its checklist, assess emotional relationship before rejecting a donor. But in Emma and Grace's room, none of those waves reached. Grace awoke slowly with each cycle of light. Each time she opened her eyes, she reoriented herself. Where am I? Where is Emma? Where is Robert? Emma grew stronger with each meal, each nap, each drawing brightened with new colors. She returned to the small questions that made adults smile all day. Can I wash my hair tomorrow? When can I run a little mommy? Can you teach me to bake? Each, when marked a milestone in a future just opened, letters began to arrive. From an elderly woman half a world away. You remind me of the daughter I lost. From a boy Emma's age, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor, so no one has to wait. Robert gathered them all into a box, saving them for later. For now, all he wanted was to walk into the room each morning and see the two of them breathing warm present. Invitations came too, forums, awards, TV interviews. Robert showed them to Grace once she was awake enough to hear. She shook her head. I don't need that, she whispered. I just need her home. And so, the invitations piled into a stack of thank you letters, answered only with a note of gratitude. Our family is grateful, but please allow us silence. Day after day, that silence became medicine. Bodies repaired themselves, stitches hardened, numbers brightened on the charts. Then, one morning with sunlight, Grace was transferred out of intensive care into a regular room. Emma pushed open the door, ran the tiniest steps she was allowed, stopped at the nurse's line, then stretched out her arms and asked, "When can we go home?" Robert looked at them both, at the paper crown still hanging from the strap of her bag, and for the first time dared to say aloud, "Soon." The living room was no longer a place for IV poles and boxes of gloves. Today, it was the stage for 7 years old. Yellow, pink, and purple balloons bunched in clusters, ribbons brushing the shoulders of adults as they passed. On the table sat a pink frosted number 7 cake, edged with tiny stars crowned in the center by a paper crown, the very one from the hospital now pressed stiff to hold its shape. Emma wore a yellow dress, her hair just beginning to curl, her cheeks flushed with life. Friends poured in like a stream. Some still remembered visiting the hospital and brought new drawings to trade for the old ones. A neighbor arrived with a basket of oranges, saying this year's fruit was sweet eat and grow strong. Robert stood near the door with a camcorder capturing everything. The laughter, the crinkle of wrapping paper, the call for Emma to blow out her candles. Grace stood at the table pouring juice, reminding Emma to eat slowly, her hand brushing the girl's shoulder now, and then checking an invisible point steady safe. On the bookshelf's right corner stood a new wooden frame. Inside was the letter, the handwriting uneven but clear. If I don't wake up, know that Mommy said yes. Robert had placed it there the day they returned, not to display, but to remind love needs no certificate, no shared surname, no stamp. It needs to stay. It needs to say yes when the world says no. As the clock ticked toward the moment the crowd counted down 3, 2, 1, Emma blew out the candles. Applause burst like confetti. Robert couldn't hold back. His laughter rang out the sound had taken so long to return. Grace bent and kissed Emma's hair, scented with the soft warmth of children's shampoo. Someone shouted for a corner slice because the corners have more frosting, and the whole room laughed. In the middle of the party, when the noise softened enough for voices to carry, Emma turned to Grace with the same serious, warm eyes she'd had a year ago in the hospital. "Mommy, number 2. Now I'm really going to live right. No music cut off this time. No room held its breath, but the weight of the question still landed squarely between them. Grace knelt, pressed her forehead to her daughter's hands on her shoulders, smiling. "Yes, you will live." Emma grinned, hugged her tightly, then turned back to cake and presents, as if she had finished some enormous task and could return to being a child. Robert lowered the camera, stood still a few seconds, swallowing something that caught in his throat. He had changed in the past year, fewer hours at work, more dinners at home, more embraces. He no longer tried to sort the people he loved into boxes labeled with names. He let them be where they belonged, side by side on the same sofa, in the same frame. Grace was no longer the employee. She needed no new title. She was simply a mother confirmed every day. Outside, their story continued to live its own life. Retold in organ donation campaigns, mentioned in hospitals, adding emotional bond assessment to donor screenings, repeated by young doctors who said they had chosen their profession again. But inside the home, those big currents shrank down into small things, weekend cookie-baking checkup schedules taped to the fridge children's songs playing nightly in Emma's room. Each tiny slice of time restored to its rightful owner laughter. After the friends left the house quieted, and the three of them sat together in the living room. Evening light struck the framed letter, sharpening its words. Emma opened her last gift, a watercolor set. She tried it immediately, painting 3 figures standing together, a paper crown floating above. "I drew Mommy in the middle," she said, pointing to Grace. Robert looked and didn't correct her. No one needed to. Night fell. From the kitchen came the faint clink of dishes. Robert hung a new photo on the wall, Emma blowing candles, Grace beside her himself, standing behind with a hand on each of their shoulders. Beneath it, he wrote in marker home. Not the Hayes family, not the billionaire's house, not anything that could be labeled, just home. Later, when Emma slept, Grace passed the bookshelf and paused at the framed letter. She touched the glass lightly, not to check for dust, but as if greeting a version of herself from a year ago, the woman who had written yes on a night both silent and terrifying. Behind her, Robert stood quietly. Then he spoke softly, as if to the room itself. "Thank you for staying. The story ends here, not because there's nothing left to tell, but because the rest should be lived, not read. A child given back her time. A mother called by her true name. A father relearning how to be home, and a letter framed where all can see, reminding everyone, true love does not require DNA. It requires courage. At the right moment, a single yes can light an entire house." The story closes with a paper crown, a letter that says, "Mommy said yes," and a family defined by choice, not blood. If it were you, would you support allowing organ donations based on emotional bonds like Grace's to be formally approved? Why or why not? If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Turn on the bell to follow the next stories. Thank you for staying until the end. See you next time.